All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. Beastiklees is here to talk more D&D. Now we're inching our way a little bit closer to actually, getting to your introduction of your first steps of playing the game, which is creating a character. I'd say that is your introduction into actually playing Dungeons and Dragons is creating a character. For me, that's one of my most favorite parts, things to do. It's so much fun you know, to build this, this creature that that you will become, and then as you fill out the paper, you start to flesh out its personality and what it looks like and how you want to play or act it, and that's just so much fun, and it's half the excitement of when you actually get to play it and you actually get to throw that character out into the world and get to interact with. But before we actually fill out a sheet, we need to understand a couple of concepts. First and foremost, the different playable races. Okay, Dungeons and Dragons has 8 different playable races. Correction, there are actually 9 different races that exist in Dungeons and Dragons. There is an expanded playable race that exists right now, but for the purpose of this video, we are just going to go ahead and go over the basic 9 that exists in the player's handbook. So let's go ahead and say hello to each of our races. Alright, race number 1, we have our dwarves. Now I'm sure everyone has seen The Hobbit, or at least most of us have seen The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. You've seen a dwarf, you've got Gimli, you've got Thorin Oakenshield and, his company of dwarves. They are, short, hardy, glorious beards. I mean, just the most beautiful and, for me, the most jealousy, instilling beards that you ever damn seen. And I wish I had the ability to grow something as illustrious as a dwarven beard, but I'll work with what I got. All right. The other thing about dwarves is dwarves are probably, out of all of the 9 races or all of the races that you can play in Dungeons and Dragons, dwarves are probably your most proud race. Dwarves will definitely tell you where they come from, how strong their bloodline is, how, like, what generation of dwarf or what type of generation of dwarf they come from, most likely. They're very proud race. I mean, not to say that the other races aren't proud, but a dwarf will remind you that they are a dwarf, and that, you should be lucky to have a dwarf in your presence. So there's your dwarf. Elves is the next race. Once again, we're gonna go back to Lord of the Rings. If you've seen elves, Legolas in The Hobbit. You have all of the elves of Mirkwood and King Thranduil. You've got the elves of Rivendell with Lord Elrond, or even Lady Galadriel. They're all elves, very tall, slender, beautiful looking, very long and, silky looking hair, the pointed ear, of course, being their most identifiable trait about them. Once again, a very proud race, maybe not so much as dwarves. It is one of the, along with dwarves, is one of the more ancient races as well. And they are very majestic as well. So there you have it with the elves. All right, halflings is the next one. Halfling is, you would probably more commonly know it as hobbits. So you got Frodo, Bilbo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, all those people. Once again, going back to Lord of the Rings, because it's something very easy to reference, and you've seen them. It's very quick to go to those two to look at it. Halflings are, a very friendly race. They're most likely to be seen amongst almost every city or town that you would go to. They'd be a very commonplace amongst common society, and they're also a very compassionate race. I'd say that they have their close knit families or people that they make friends with. They probably make friends to keep friends. They are personable race, I'd probably say, and yeah, probably one of the more friendly races that you'd come across. All right, moving on to humans. Humans. I mean, really, what more is there to say? I imagine that everyone here is a human. You know what a human is. As far as in D&D, they are one of your most common races that you're going to come across. Very industrious people or race. Maybe not as ancient as the rest of the races that we're going to go over, but very much so commonplace in the D&D world. A lot of the villages, towns, cities that you're going to come across are most likely human built. If not, dwarven or elvish in origin, I'd say a majority of the settlements that you're going to come across will most likely be human, and yeah, a lot of your interactions will be with humans, more than likely. All right, moving on to what I personally think is one of the more badass races that exists in D&D, and that is the Dragonborn. Now, stop right there. I know what you're thinking. Dragonborn. Hey, isn't that a Skyrim thing? Not that type of Dragonborn. In Skyrim, that's, the one of those races born with like the soul of a dragon. In this case, Dragonborn in D&D are literally born of dragons. They are dragon in appearance, but they're humanoid. Not to say that they are the offspring of dragons and humans. However, that's a very interesting thought of how that would actually work out in that way. Oh man, but no, they are actually their own race. They are some type of dragon offspring that, in some shape or form, they are their own race of dragon that is humanoid. Most likely, dragons are very, large, burly creatures covered in scales. Everything about them basically says they're draconic in nature. Their face is very lizard-like. They probably have horns. They're covered in scales of multitude of colors that exist. And just real quick, with each individual race, this is just a brief introduction to these races. I will be in later videos. I will eventually go and piece out each individual race. To give you a better perspective on what each individual race brings to the table. But for now, we're just gonna take a glance over. So, going back to Dragonborns, yeah, they are dragon, but they're bipedal. They interact, kind of like every other race. They're humanoid in shape, but everything else about them says dragon, and that's awesome. All right, next up we got gnomes. Gnomes are one of your other short races, along with dwarves and halflings. I'd say gnomes are probably the shortest, if I'm not mistaken, race that you'll come across. They're another friendly in nature, but they're more, they love to live life, and they love not only living life, but to squeeze every ounce of life and aspect of life that they can get out of it. You're most likely going to find gnomes to be, curious in nature. They find something new, and they want to tinker with it. They want to investigate and figure out, what makes the world tick, and just get everything that they can experience out of life. That's probably one of their biggest aspects about being a gnome is just simply living. And the fact that gnomes are alive, a living gnome is a happy gnome, basically. Yeah, I'd probably say they're your most fun loving. Um, they probably are prone to being trickster type. At least that's what I always think of when I think of gnome is kind of tricksy type race of individuals, as well as curiosity. If you've played World of Warcraft, for example, the gnomes are very industrial. A lot of their stuff is made. They're almost kind of steampunkish in nature, because everything is like an automaton, and they tinker with stuff, and they're builders. They're what can they discover about life? Ask a gnome, and they'll probably be the ones to tell you. All right, moving on to the next race, we have half elf. Half elf being they're half elf and half human. I mean, if you see an elf, I imagine people look at Legolas, or they look at Arwen from Lord of the Rings, and say, yeah, I wouldn't mind getting with that. Elves are beautiful creatures. So yeah, humans and elves, pretty self-explanatory. Somewhere down the road, some of them interacted, they got together, and some months down the road, I'm not exactly sure how it works in the fantasy realm, baby popped out and had a mixing of both genes of humans and elves. So there you have it with the half elf. All right, half orc. So similar to the half elf. Real quick, let's go ahead and take a look at an orc. Here's one. Here's another one. Somewhere down the road, I mean, to each their own, humans and orcs hooked up. Now that I think about it, maybe not every single time getting with an orc was voluntary. I mean, orcs are pretty primal race of beings in it of themselves. They're definitely more likely to be more barbaric in nature. So perhaps somewhere down the road, an orc may have forced themselves upon a human, and unfortunately an offspring was created from that, and half orcs were born. But to say that somewhere down the road, half orcs also ended up becoming a little bit more accepted into human life. Oftentimes you will find a half orc pretty commonplace, or perhaps commonplace among human cities, along with halflings and half elves, because of the fact that they do have human blood in them. You may most likely find half orc among the people or the common folk in a regular town or village that you may come across. They are somewhat human in appearance, but they are a lot thicker, probably a lot more muscular in build. And instead of orcs having the very protruding lower canines, they still have the protruding lower canines, but just not as dramatic as their full orc ancestors. All right, and our final race today we're going to go over is the Tiefling or Tiefling. I haven't actually gotten an official pronunciation of how it should be. I've heard it 50% Tiefling, 50% Tiefling. I kind of like to pronounce it as Tiefling. Something just seems really appealing to that pronunciation, so that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Tieflings are offspring of humans and demons. Now, either somewhere down the road, a human and a demon got together and created, a baby, and there's your product. Or perhaps it was a curse. Perhaps somewhere down the line, the Tieflings family, got in with the wrong group, or perhaps they were cultists or whatever, and their bloodline became cursed, and then somewhere down the road, the children, bore that type of appearance. Tieflings, once again being humanoid in shape, do have a lot of aspects of demonic presence. So most likely they may have, iridescent eyes, or perhaps they're completely black, or they're completely white and, pupilless or something. They may have horns. Their skin will most likely be red. They have hoofed feet, tails, or any combination of the that list of appearances or attributes. So there you have it with all of those races. Let's go ahead and cover them once more. You have the dwarf, elf, halfling, human, dragonborn, gnomes, half elf, half orc, and the tiefling. So, once again, we're getting our way a little bit closer to finally being able to fill out a character sheet, but it's good to know this information, because that is half of knowing how to fill out a character sheet, is becoming familiar with this information, such as the playable races, because that will help once you decide your race. And then in the following video, we're going to go over classes. Once you have that, everything else should just basically fall out onto the paper. So until then, I'll see you next time, everyone.